I've been mediating.
Oh yeah.
I've been mediating the groups, trying to set up the meetings. I think there's misunderstandings in a lot of the areas, and you know, particularly with what Brian said last week. I'm chairing the meetings, so I know.
Oh, that's the
And,
meetings.
when we had the meetings over at Canada 2 weeks ago on Wednesday, everybody, this was a suggestion from the floor. It wasn't from Brian or anybody, that the community, and I'm saying the community because the men's fire was there, and Aaron Detler was there. They all agreed to have the next meeting this past Wednesday. That was a direction. They just followed the direction. And as a mediator, well, I never knew either till the day before that they were going to Dunda. So I mean, there's just some mixed opinions on that process. I happen to be the mediator, so I know what the process is. I'm meeting with Bill all the time. And these guys trying to iron out the situation and say, okay, here's the way things are at. So for me personally, as a sort of, I've been in the elected system for almost 20 years on a national level. Bill Montour, Chief Bill Montour. No. Larry Salt is my name. I've been in the elected system. I spent almost 20 years in the elected system and ran for national chief in the country, so I know very well the process and sort of where we are. I left the elected system to go to the corporate sector. So I went to the corporate sector for 10 years, moved to the U.S. and moved back here. So I've been involved with the men's fire and these guys here, trying to facilitate, trying to mediate the process. All my point is, look, we know what the issues are. We don't want to fight each other in public forum. Do that behind closed doors, whatever we need to do, but don't send Brantford a message that we're against each other. I'm solid against that. I'm not for us fighting each other. We do that in an elected system. You go into the Assembly of First Nations, the Chiefs of Ontario, we can't get consensus anywhere. So let's be real about this process. That's really what's going on nationally in the country. Everybody has their ideologies. We got a national chief who purports to represent us. Nobody knows what he does behind closed doors. And the Prime Minister isn't lying when he stands up before the Canadian public and says, I met with the chiefs, because Atleo is in there talking to the Prime Minister unbeknownst to anybody else at the community. These are the kind of problems that we have with respect to the grassroots. We got a disconnect from the band council to the community. Let's be real. In every community, not just this community. New Credit has it. Remote communities has it. And I spent a lot of time in a remote community as well, so I know for a fact that we have this serious disconnect. And it's really how we come to terms with our issues. We got the factions everywhere. It's not just here. Every one of the communities have their factions. And so it's really, you know, how do we sort out our own issues? How do we get to yes? How do we move forward? So I've said to Bill, the men's fire, I've said to Bill Squares, the Mohawks, I've said to Gaswinta, we don't want to fight each other in a public forum. That's not where, you know, Brantford is not our friend. As First Nations, as people amongst ourselves, the non-native government's not our friend. We know that from history. We don't have to repeat history all the time. What we need to do is set the stage for the future and how we handle ourselves in the future. Because we need each other. Bottom line. Anyway, I'm gonna consensus.
Right.
In the minds, when we've sat around the table, I've sat as Grand Chief here in this province. And when I sit around the table and hear consensus, we'll never get consensus. What's somebody's view of consensus?
Right.
Is that everybody having to agree? Or is it majority consensus?
So how is consensus a part of the debate process with what's going on here? Is there seem to be a structured view of what consensus is for either side? I would say there's not been a structured view because we haven't had that adequate sit down to be able to talk about a structured view. We have elected council that everybody says is under government's dole. We understand that. We have Confederacy. We have a breakdown in Confederacy, according to some, and a majority in the community that I talk to, that there's a breakdown. I went to the discussions here for 10 straight days last year. 10 straight days. I was in there from morning till night.
I wished everybody in the community was there. Unfortunately, we had these arguments that this is not recital. We've all heard it. We've read it in the media. I mean, let's be real about the issue, right? So we got sanctions that say, well, that wasn't the Great Law discussion. Well, nobody said it was a recital. They said it was a discussion on the Great Law. I sat there for 10 straight days. I know. I just wished everybody would have been there. At least if it just listening to the discussion. At least just listening to the debate. Then I go to Oneida a couple months ago. Spend 3 days there in Oneida listening to the recital. I don't think the recital does justice in 3 days. You can't teach something in 3 days. And so we got people that purport to be supportive of the Confederacy, and there's no respect. Let's be real. We've talked about this in the Men's Fire. I've been straight up to the Mohawk workers here. I've been straight up to Goswenta, and I've been straight up to the Men's Fire and elected guys. I've had my own arguments with the elected guys across the country because of what we view as consensus. Everybody has a different story about consensus. But when we backbite each other, it's really what we do. We backbite each other. We're not honest with each other. We can't be honest about our opinions. We say we respect the women. Do we? I've said in chiefs' assemblies where Mohawk men have stood up, Mohawk chiefs, and said, we know how to respect our men. And happened to be sitting beside a girl that was going with the very guy that was talking like that, this Mohawk leader. She said, he's an ass. He beat me when I was living with him. That's the kind of stuff we got going on in our territories. And then we stand at the microphone and acting like we're an angel. Come on, let's be real. This is not real. Consensus, we'll never reach it, if depending on whose terms it is.
Right. So,
what is it?
So out west, there was a case in the court, Canadian court, where one man stepped up to and tried to stop a forestry development happening. The conclusion of the court was that one or a small group of individuals can't assert the rights of the collective. In
the same scenario we have here, right? I mean, here, doesn't this astonish anybody? I often wonder why this doesn't astonish anybody. We can block roads here, right here at the number 6 highway for Elsipatog, over in the Atlantic, and yet we have this going on right amongst us. We can shut down major economic tracts across the country in support of whatever region it is, and we can't come to terms with our own stuff. Does anybody think about that?
Is this your own stuff, though? That's just the question I'm hearing from other people. Well,
really the question is anybody's stuff really our own stuff? Because we're so ingrained in the white invasion, that whole white invasion and taking things on our lands under deception. And now we got a paradigm shift that we have to get together in our own minds to think outside the box. We're so used to thinking inside the box that we can't see beyond. And you know, everybody's so historical about yesteryear, and we need that. But who's seeing for tomorrow? Who's seeing for the next 50 years? Who's seeing for our grandchildren? Really, seriously. This is the stuff that I don't think our leadership is discussing. I left the circle for 10 years, lived in the United States, the capitalistic country of the world. Come back here in our political circles, it's like I never left, man. I was out for 10 years. It's like, that's the kind of stuff we got. You know, what used to frustrate me the most in the elected system is that I'd hear the same story every time I went in there. Same history. I'd go to the microphone and say, we know the history. Let's go forward. Here's where we can go. Let's stop talking about yesteryear. Yes, we need to understand that. Yes, we need to know where we came from. Yes, we need to know all that history. But somebody tell me where the next 20 years is going to go. And let's chart the course for the next 20 years. We want to hear the discussion on the Indian Act. Dump the Indian Act. We don't need it. Oh, everybody wants to embrace it. Why? We talk about, my own issue was, let's write our own constitution. And let's not ask the federal government. We write our own constitution and we deliver it to them and say, we're acting on our sovereignty. We are putting our own election, we're putting our own land codes, everything. It's right here. Screw your Indian Act. We're not interested because it has no merit in this country. But yet everybody thinks it does. So, and the Indian Act has been a discussion as long as I got elected in 1987. I went till 2002 in the elected system, been with all the big boys in the big meetings and the small meetings. Understand the discussion. End of story.